Alright, it's been about a year since I've done this. I'm in the process of setting up a Patreon, so if you like my content, you can support my Patreon. I'll put a link here eventually for it. Today I'm going to do Magical Industrial Revolution, which is supposed to be sort of like Atlantis, in which magical technology zooms ahead of what it ought to be in just one place, a mythical land that's supposed to resemble 19th century London. But I'm running a Lamentations campaign. It was not that hard to convert it to 16th century. And I ordered this just before the lockdown, and it didn't get to me till after the lockdown. One of my first complaints about it is the pages don't stay open. You gotta hold it open. That's a problem. And the way it's organized, it was really hard for me to quickly, in the middle of the game, find stuff, even using the pages, the table of contents. But it's got some really good advice on how to run this and references and stuff. So Indon is supposed to be 19th century London. And here's a little thing about how to do prices. I had to alter the prices a little bit because my players are used to a silver standard, but I didn't alter it too much because I wanted the economy here to be inflationary. I wanted things to be expensive, and so I increased the amount of treasure they got temporarily in order to help facilitate this. But I had to put these Post-its in here to help me find stuff, and I printed out a copy of it, and I found that was easier to use than trying to use this book. So there's a map of this mythical London and a little description of each place. It's not unusual for a thing. Here's buildings, which are rated according to general buildings: poor, lower class, middle class, upper class, and unusual. And you can roll a D10 for each category or a D100 to get just a random building. So if you need a random building, you can roll it and it's there. And there's this weather thing, which the weather, it starts off with normal types, which you roll a D6 for on this table. And then as things get more magical, you roll a D10 and eventually a D12. In the D12, you start getting into some magical types of weather. Here's some random encounters, which, again, they're according to types, where you can roll a D20 for each type, or a D100 to do the whole table. Ranked according to class, so if you're doing one upper class encounter, you can roll a D10 to get one. Or middle class, you roll a D20, or you can roll a D100 and just get a random encounter. And here's another encounter table that's easier to use. And here's a page that tells you a bunch of useful tables. Yeah, in spite of that, it was really hard to find stuff on the fly in the middle of the game. Here's some nice things to help spur adventures. Now, the meat of this game is that there are a bunch of magical technologies. And periodically, there's a chance that they will progress. You're supposed to roll a D8, I believe, or D6 for them. Maybe it's a D8 for them, but I didn't do that. I rolled a D3 at first until I got one that was up at level 3. Then I rolled a D4 till I got one that was at level 4. Then a D5 because I've got a weird sized die. And finally a D6. But yeah, so they have 6 different levels of the technology. And when you get to level 6, you have an apocalypse that destroys a city or maybe even the world. So the first technology is about midway, it develops into flying cars. The next one, in the midway, it develops portable holes and bags of holding. This one is teleportation and polymorph, which develops into making polymorph meat. This one is divination, which starts off useful and could turn your city into a police state that everybody flees from. One is illusionary servants. It starts off with something to put on stage, but then you get where you can make them do work in your factory. See, I dropped the page and now I'm going to find out where I was. Okay, this one is another divination one that's for finding minerals. Finding minerals cheaper. And then there's one that starts off with golems and eventually turns into an analog of computers. And then there's these various apocalyptic omens that could warn the players that things are not quite right. There's a chapter on services, like how to do justice in this city. And certain kinds of spells are illegal. And there's healing, and magical diseases. Now, one of my problems with a lot of these tables is that things are not in alphabetical order, so it's really hard to find something, even if you can find the page the table's on. Some accommodations and newspapers, transport to move around the city. Yeah, here it is, newspapers. And there's a thing on the social classes, which my players didn't use that much. And ministers and scandals. And I had a newspaper when I was writing this with interesting headlines which show what's going on now. In my world, Britain has become a republic, so I didn't use the monarch at all. Here's the season. My players, I did run this, but the players didn't notice. And the deadly sins, which when you go carousing, you could indulge in one of these deadly sins. The carousing results, roll a D100, or you could roll an individual one. And you get results based on which sin that particular carousing thing falls into. And then there's magical industry with a price list, which I had to adapt a little bit. So I had to make the cheaper things cheaper, but I didn't left the expensive things where they were. And here's the thing, metals and gems. Okay, so it's a magical industrial revolution. So there's these magical technologies that allow you to make magic items without being a wizard. The magical accumulator allows you to accumulate magic. Then you put it in the magical battery. A spell breeding reactor can turn 2 spells into 3. A enchantment engraver allows you to put the spell into an object. And if you sometimes these devices, especially the spell breeding reactor, causes explosions. This periodic table of spells is an interesting way of classifying the commonly used spells in D&D. And the spell mutations happens occasionally with this accidentally or on purpose. If you used more than one spell, two different spells in the spell breeding reactor. Here's a bunch of generic low-level spells that sound a lot like the ones you're familiar with from Dungeons and Dragons. And there's a bunch of unique low-level spells like Climb on My Shoulders, where 1 to 3 people can climb on each other's shoulders and go up, even if the bottom person's no longer on the ground. See, it won't stay open. This is a problem. Okay, and you can buy spells. So this setting has the possibility of buying temporary spells that you can just use that day. It only lasts for a few hours. Or you can pay a lot more and get an actual scroll. I would randomly roll a list, and make the spells available would change from day to day. And you can make money by selling your spells, which I told the players, but I guess they didn't believe me or didn't think it was fun playing, making a bunch of scrolls and selling them. So here's a bunch of magic shops and some disreputable wizards, some unresolved problems you could find. There's a chapter of magic items. Again, my problem is that these are not in alphabetical order, and so if you're trying to find a specific thing, it can be really hard in the middle of a game session. Even if there's only 20 things on there, and you know the name, it's sometimes hard to find because they're not in alphabetical order. There's some potions, some minor magic weapons. Some of these are pretty interesting, like the toad grenades, stone frog with a pin in its mouth. And once you throw it, every living creature larger than a rat within a 1d10 radius must save or become a toad for 1 round. And there's a whole bunch of magic weapons. Whole bunch. And a table where you roll what random kind of weapon it is. And prosthetics. I made the fumble table have poke out your eye or cut off your limb while I was running this to encourage them to go buy prosthetics, but nobody ever rolled bad enough to need that. There was one player who went a couple of times there and got some prosthetics attached just for fun. All right, setting it on the citizens, NPC rumors, a bunch of wizards and nobles, random ones. If you use one, it's hard to find the information again. Useful NPCs, poor, lower class, middle class, upper class, the mob. And see, I'm having trouble with this because there's thieves and archers, scoundrels, some rivals and villains, including scheming wizards, arch criminals, some various wrongs and injustices, and then the menagerie. We're having trouble with the pages still. Okay, so as things get more magical, elsewhere creatures from other dimensions start showing up, and elsewhere rifts leading to other dimensions. There's some exotic and nightmarish creatures. And there's a few new creatures in here, like the mild dogs. It's basically a big friendly dog, and once you start petting it, you have to make a saving throw in order to stop. It's a great thing to put in this place to guard against thieves. The Ghost Whale of London, skeletons, the Speaking Rat Society. It's a whole bunch of rats wearing clothes that are plotting against humanity. When things get really magical, stray spells start appearing and wandering around. There's a whole bunch of skeleton variants that's useful to any other kinds of campaign. And some more monsters. And then there are a few sample dungeons, some catacombs with what's in them. And here's a little short adventure and another short adventure that I did use. Some generic dwelling floor plans and stuff. Wonder Mansion generator. Nobody ever broke into a rich person's house, so I couldn't use that. Here's some reasons to visit and some generic plot hooks. I used some of those. Some lectures at the college. Nobody ever went to the college. I was able to fit Big Puppet into this campaign pretty easily. Some inspirational material. A big I Search the Body table. And here's some clues to help run the game, including the pre-session checklist. Here mine is from the session before the last. You can see the room to live technology stayed at level 1 for a really long time while the others were advancing, and then all of a sudden every time they advanced, it advanced until it ended up being the one that destroyed my world. Anyway, this is a very fun book, and I highly recommend it, but I'm not sure that you should bother ordering the real book. It might be better to get the PDF and print it out, because loose pages are a lot easier to handle than this book is.